want to live longer, mental skills matter the most. Flow overwrites trauma and it overwrites burnout. You know, it's neuroprotective against depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, cardiac-related stress conditions. It overwrites burnout and overwrites PTSD.
Hi, Steven. Welcome to the HumanWare project. It's very honored to have you here today with us. The first impression I got from you from reading your book is in the early 90s that you are covering a lot of extreme sports. At the time, like things like surfing or different sports are quite a niche things. So could you tell us what make you being so all for it?
That's an interesting question. I was just an action sport athlete. So I grew up, I didn't like traditional athletics. I was a punk rocker, and there was sort of the punks versus the jocks. And so at the time, surfing, skiing, skating, those weren't really considered sports. And when I sort of started my career, I was both a journalist, as a journalist, I was covering science, predominantly neuroscience, and I was covering action sports, all of those. And my work ended up sort of being at where those places intersected at performance. And that was sort of my early work.
Because we know you are very well known in your work in the flow stage, do you think there's any link between the flow state with the people who are actually really good at athletes?
What caught my attention early on was this was in the early 1990s, and the 1990s is often referred to as the era of impossible. So more impossible feats got done in action sports than ever before. So things that had never been done before, we didn't think they were possible. The rules were don't do this or you'll die. Those kinds of things. And it was surfing, it was skiing, it was rock climbing, it was snowboarding, it was all the sports. And that had my attention because we had never seen anything like this in the history of sports. It was literally the greatest flowering of human potential. But what really caught my attention was the community, the athletes themselves. So in the 1990s, if you knew anything about peak performance, it was predominantly about genetics and money, really. Like you had to have the right parents and the right genes and right family, and then you had to have the right childhood. Your parents needed to have money because you had the right coaches and the right equipment and go to the right schools and get the right training. And the athletes I knew, the people who were routinely reinventing what was possible for the human species, had none of those things going for them. Most of the people I knew had very challenging childhoods. They had broken homes. They didn't have a lot of education. They didn't have a lot of money. In these communities, there was a lot of substance use. There was a lot of risk-taking. It's an action sports community. And normally when you put those things together in a community, what happens is people die young or they go to jail. What they don't do is reinvent what's possible for the human species. And so the question was, first, what is going on? Because we'd never seen anything like it in sports history. And the second question was, are you kidding? These athletes? How is that possible, right? So it was a double mystery. And the answer, which you gave away, was that these athletes, for a bunch of different reasons, had figured out how to tap into the state of flow. And flow is an optimal state of performance, and it amplifies everything. So you see huge upticks in physical performance, stronger endurance goes up, fast twitch muscle response is faster. Cognitive skills are amazing, right? Motivation soars, learning rates go way up, creative decision-making, creative problem-solving, all these things are very important in action sports, also go through the roof. And there's a tremendous amount of emotional well-being as well. So you had some really like sort of broken people coming together, but flow, because it underpins happiness and well-being and is protected against depression and stress and things like that, it really actually was a healing force in those communities as well.
Wow, that was interesting to know, because right now we're taking all those extreme sports for granted. But what do you think triggers those people who probably have the same minimum, like not so in their favor conditions, but trigger them go to the flow instead of going to the jail?
Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 28 that have been discovered. There's probably way more, but there's 28 that we know of. Action sports are filled with them as a general rule. So flow follows focus. It only shows up when our attention is in the right here, right now. That's what all the triggers do. Novelty is a flow trigger. When we're in novel environments, action sports take place in very novel environments. That will drive attention to the present moment. Risk is another flow trigger. Obviously, there's a lot of that in action sports. There's a bunch of these, but what was really the big deal, what changed everything, was before sort of the action sports revolution happened, skiing, for example. The way you won, you were the fastest man or woman from the top to the bottom. Speed was the only thing that mattered, right? That was it. Action sports came along and they said, no, 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 no. It's creativity. You have to interpret the terrain. Creativity requires pattern recognition where we link ideas together. That's a flow trigger. When we link ideas together, the brain releases a little squirt of dopamine, right? And that's focusing chemicals. And everybody knows this if you've done a crossword puzzle, it's Sudoku. You get an answer right, that little rush of happiness, that's dopamine, right? That's pattern recognition. Action sports, suddenly it was creative terrain interpretation. So they were literally creative problem solving their way down the mountain. And as a result, it produced a tremendous amount of flow. And these were communities of practice. And so a lot of the group flow triggers is a shared collective version of a flow state. Group flow, there's individual flow, me in a flow state, and group flows could be me and you together. Like we get lost in a great conversation and an hour goes by and we don't even notice. That's low-grade group flow. A lot of the group flow triggers came into place because there were very tight communities. There were only like 5 or 6 places in the world you could go. There was, a spot in France, there was a spot in where I was in Squaw Valley, Jackson Hole, Whistler, British Columbia, a couple other places were sort of the hub. So everybody was living together in these communities of practices, and it all just sort of came together at once, and it produced this tremendous flowering and human performance. And I was in the middle of it, using neuroscience, going, wait, can we figure this out? What you predominantly see is what's known as metastability, and then you see synchrony in brainwaves. So brainwaves come very close together. They start almost repeating, and then they break apart. That's metastability. And then they start moving the same. And you see this in 2 networks, the goal-directed network and the executive control network. They lock up. Almost all other portions of the prefrontal cortex get very, very quiet. Brainwaves, as you asked, move from, like normally, right now, we're in beta. It's a fast-moving wave. It means you're awake, you're alert, you're paying attention. Underneath that is a slightly slower wave. That's alpha. That's daydreaming mode, right? Relaxed, creative. And below that is theta, which is a much slower wave. That's where you are during deeply focused attention or REM sleep when you're dreaming. And flows take place on the borderline between alpha and theta. So we see brainwaves drop from where they normally are in beta down to the alpha theta borderline. Flow has that in common with deep meditation, and other states, they all share that same borderline. And then you see 5 of the most potent neurochemicals the brain can produce all sort of rush into our system at once. That's a quick and dirty overview of what goes on in the brain during flow.
But when we sing that, because I do know you're writing about Navy SEALs, you write about...
But so I write about those things. At the Flow Research Collective, we train people in 28 different industries in 156 countries, right? So we work with everybody from lawyers to Meta to Google to Facebook to Microsoft to Accenture and McKinsey. So it's a very wide spectrum. I started out writing about action sport athletes because in the beginning, we didn't know if our subjects were in flow. We didn't have the neurobiology I just laid out for you. So is our research subject in flow was a really hard question to solve. With action sport athletes at the upper level, if they lived, they were in flow. There was no other way to survive. Same thing with a lot of the Navy SEALs. So what those extreme cases gave us was a way in the beginning to figure out, oh, our study subjects really are in flow. We know what we're looking at. Now, we do this work all over the world in every other domain.
And what will be the method for people to really get into the flow? And is there any technologies to help us as a human? Like, let's say, if we think about human also as a piece of hardware, can we go back into our mind and rewrite our own system?
So I'm suspicious of the hardware-software metaphor because that comes out of cognitive neuroscience, and I'm a computational neuroscience. And we're trying to move past the computer metaphors because the brain is a complex system and a computer is a complicated system, and there's a difference. That said, to answer your question, the brain is neuroplastic, as you know, so of course we can rewrite it, and flow states are remarkably trainable. So I just put some numbers around it. Past couple of years in our core training at the Flow Research Collective, which was called Zero to Dangerous, I think we trained about 35,000 people, and on average, out of those 35,000 people we saw after an 8-week training of working with the flow triggers and a couple other things, we saw about a 73.4% increase in the amount of flow, time spent in flow in our subjects. So this is very, very trainable. Everybody is hardwired for peak performance. It's a built-in feature of being human, and there are a bunch of fundamental ways to train it. And you got to start really simply. You were going to ask, so I'll just tell you what you need to do. Yeah. One, here's the most obvious, and nobody loves this, but flow's a high energy state. Okay. So you need lots of sleep. You need 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night to routinely produce flow. So the same sleep you need for good performance matters for flow. Nutrition, hydration, those baseline things matter. And then it's really about just sort of applying the flow triggers in your own life. And I'll just give you a couple examples. So flow follows focus. As I said, it only shows up when our attention is in the right here, right now. So that makes, obviously, complete concentration as a flow trigger. So what do I mean by that? What does complete concentration actually mean? It means that when you, let's say you want to get into flow at work, right? It means, first of all, manicure your workspace. Turn off all your email notifications. Turn off your cell phone. Hang a sign on your door that says, buzz off, I'm flowing, so you're not going to get interrupted. And try to literally protect your space from all distraction. I teach executives to batch process emails or messages, so only answer them in the morning or at the end of the day. Limit communication channels. Right? When I started this work, most executives had like 3 channels. You could email them or text them or call them. Now most executives I work with have 17 different channels coming in WhatsApp and messages and Slack. And yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. So limit those as much as possible. And then, this is sort of a secret, try to focus for about 90 minutes at a time. So the human brain, most people know, they go through a sleep cycle. It's 90 to 110 minutes long. You have an inverted awake and alert cycle that's 90 to 110 minutes long. So even though most of us have fractured our attention, we can't pay attention for more than like 5 minutes at a time because we're used to looking at our cell phones, you can retrain the brain very easily to start focusing for about 90 minutes because it's built to do that. So I like to tell people to see, if you can, start your workday with a 90-minute block of uninterrupted concentration devoted to your hardest task. Get the biggest task out of the way first, and wall that off from all outside distractions is one of the simplest places to start.
Just curious, let's say, okay, if I'm someone that I'm totally feel like no motivation of life, I just feel there's no hope, no goals, watching this show, what they can truly do to turn this wheel around?
So we now know that flow overwrites trauma and it overwrites burnout. So flow is, we now know it's neuroprotective against depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, cardiac-related stress conditions. It overwrites burnout, and it overwrites PTSD. And the easiest way to sort of fix yourself, right, when you're broken, everybody has what we call a primary flow activity. This is literally whatever you've done since you were a little kid that you just get super absorbed in and just lose track of the world and lose track of time. And everybody has something. So for me, it depends. Sometimes it's skiing. A lot of times it's group flow. It's working with my editor. So we read through everything I write together and we edit together. It's very flowy, and I love that. So that's a big primary flow activity. For my wife, it's hiking our dogs to the backcountry. My best friend, it's playing the guitar. It could be coding, it could be drawing, it could be painting, it could be dancing. For some people, it's playing with their kids. Some people, it's playing with their dogs. Doesn't really matter what it is. You know what it is because it's the thing you've done most of your life that drops you into flow, where you just lose track of time. Could be video games. Double down on your primary flow activity. That's the place to start. What happens is, as we get older, right, what do? We put down childish things. I've got responsibilities. I've got a job. I've got a family. I'm not going surfing anymore. I'm not going to go skiing. I'm not going to play the guitar. I'm going to work. And it's the worst thing you could actually do for a couple of reasons. One, flow is literally happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction and meaning and purpose. It underpins all of those at a really deep level, right? Positive psychologists have redefined happiness. There's 3 tiers of happiness. Flow is built into the definition of the upper 2 tiers. So this is how we get meaning in life. So simply by doubling down on your primary flow activity, and the research shows that you need 4 hours a week.
4 hours
That's
a week.
it.
That's
That's
it.
it.
That's
That's it.
easy.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like it's like 2 2-hour blocks.
We
in the
definitely
afternoon.
have that time
Yeah, you
nowadays
have
to
that
be
time.
doom
We've got-
scrolling at least
exactly.
for 6 hours a week or something.
What happens is it just sort of wakes you up and reminds you that you sort of love life. And also because usually the things that drop us into flow we're good at. So it starts to build up confidence again, which gets eroded by burnout, by that bad relationship you talked about. And it just reminds us we're alive. But here's the bonus. Flow is a focusing skill. So it's like meditation is a focusing skill, flow is a focusing skill. So if you go skiing on Saturday and get into flow on Saturday, and then you go to work on Monday, you're going to have an easier time getting into flow at work on Monday because you've trained your brain to focus that way. More importantly, when we move into flow, it resets the nervous system at baseline. So it flushes all those stress hormones out of your system and calms you down. So you're back to normal, right? You're feeling more alive and more awake and more alert. All those neurochemicals that underpin flow, besides boosting mood, they also boost the immune system. So you're also a little healthier, right? Flow has a big impact. I know your interest is a little bit in longevity, and flow is the engine of adult development and has a huge impact on longevity. So one of the easiest ways to extend your life is to spend as much of your life in flow as you can. Is a short version of that for a bunch of reasons. But literally doubling down on your primary flow activity. Oh, and here's the last thing I wanted to say. This isn't my work. This is work that was done at Harvard. But so creativity gets heightened in flow. The numbers are tricky. It's hard to measure creativity. There's a bunch of different ways. It's somewhere between 400 and 700% above baseline, depending on what skills you're measuring. That's like, it's a huge number, but that's not unusual for flow. So for example, the Department of Defense in the US did a study on soldiers in flow. They found they learned 230% faster than normal. McKinsey did a study of top executives and asked how much more productive are they in flow than out of flow. It was 500% more productive. So it's really a step function. But this is built into all of us. We're optimized for this, so this is available to all of us. Creativity, as I said, spikes. And it depends what creative skills you're measuring and blah, blah, blah. But what Teresa figured out is that the heightened creativity will outlast a flow state by a day, maybe even 2. So if you go skiing on Sunday and get into flow, you're going to be more creative at work on Monday and Tuesday. It'll last. The research shows if you want to live longer, mental skills matter the most. Time spent in flow, robust social life will add 7.5 years to your life. In fact, creativity, openness to experience, which underpins creativity, if you look at the charts, it plummets 2 years before you die. So there's really tight correlations. Ellen Langer, who's a good friend of mine, who's at Harvard, is sort of the pioneer of most of this work. But flow, for a long time, I got into this work on that front. Flow has helped me cure Lyme disease, which is an autoimmune condition. This is not uncommon. Autoimmune conditions, our nervous system's gone haywire. So when you flush stress hormones out of your system and reset the nervous system at 0, give a nervous system a chance to heal. So you see a lot of work with flow in people who have autoimmune conditions, both as therapies and sometimes as cures, depending. We're working right now. My lab we're working on depression, PTSD, addiction, and actually transition failures, which is technological unemployment, where people sort of get locked into what they functional fixed around what they also did. But we're also working on ALS. And so we're using flow as a treatment for ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So yes, there's direct mind-body connections.
And when you mentioned today, like about the group flow, what is that?
Flow is individual and group, and group flow comes in lots of varieties. There's interpersonal flow. This is me and you talking. Great conversation. We get so sucked in, a couple hours go by. There's team flow, which is a basketball team or a football team in a fourth quarter comeback where everybody's on the same page, or it's a band where the band just comes together and the music just soars. And then there's communitas, which is flow at scale. So in a rock concert, everybody's clapping in sync and sort of one with the music, or at a political rally where everybody's like in sync with the leader. That's group flow at scale. That's actually the first version of flow that was ever studied, and the research goes back to the 1870s. That research on communitas flow at scale is really old. We've been looking at that for almost 200 years. We do this work all the time because we work with teams, and when you're working with the Navy SEALs, for example, that's group flow in action, or when you're working with a great business team, when we do a lot of work with C-suites.
How did you do that? What is like the thing people can take away if they have a team to lead?
It works the same way. There are group flow triggers. You deploy the group flow triggers. So we talked about complete concentration. Same thing goes for the group. You want to wall the group off from the rest of the company. This is why if you build a skunk works, right, an innovation hub inside a company, you always want to move it to the edge and wall it off and protect it from the company. One of the reasons is your protected concentration. So novelty is the same thing, or risk. Risk is a individual risk, or there could be shared risk. When we work together in a company, we're sharing risk, right? The bottom line is at risk. So the individual triggers, group triggers works the same way. Here, technology has gotten really cool. I'm part of a company called Synergy. We work with teams through Zoom, and you can send this Zoom meeting, and using AI, semantic analysis, and reading some biomarkers off the vein in your forehead and a couple other things, we can determine everything from levels of trust in the room, in the meeting, psychological safety, synchrony, brain entrainment, and group flow. And we can measure that in real time. The first time you get that diagnostic report, it tells you a lot about your team. You sort of knew, but now you get to see it. It's really cool.
Your work is actually quite well known in China, like all your books being translated.
Yep.
I was reading your book, long time before we even meet in person. And when you work with different people and a different age, different, people come from different region, do you see a difference from our brain or our way to get into the flow?
Yes, obviously culture plays a role. For example, risk. Risk shifts in different cultures, obviously, but it doesn't play a huge role.
Thank you, Steven, for your time today.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you for watching this new episode of the HumanWare Project. So that we can bring more amazing topics like this one, please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us.